Hi everyone, my name is Tanya Ramos. I am a mom, a wife, and a realtor here in San Antonio, Texas. And it's sort of a cold, rainy day here in San Antonio. It's the perfect day to make a hearty beef stew for my family for dinner tonight. The thing I like about this meal is that all the ingredients are very sort of regular, attainable items from the grocery store. There's no sort of fancy, exotic ingredients, and it's something that your whole family will love. Okay guys, we're about to get started. First pro tip is put on an apron. Besides all the prep work being maybe a little bit messy, the most important part is that once we actually start cooking this, we're going to be browning this stew meat with olive oil and some butter at pretty high heats, and that means splatters. So I've got enough ruined shirts to share with you that it's worth putting the apron on before you get started. I have a 3-pound package of just lean beef boneless stew meat. My local grocery store sells it as a package of stew meat. You can also just buy sort of a chuck roast and then cut it yourself. Now you can see, or maybe you can't from this far away, these are pretty large chunks. I like to actually cut these down into smaller portions to make them a little more bite-sized, but it also helps when it's going to be cooking for a while. It helps to make the meat more tender when you're actually biting into it later. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is, besides washing my hands first, once I get this open, I'm going to cut these pieces into smaller pieces. Okay, I have cleaned my workstation, washed my hands, and ready to move on to the next step, which is chopping our onion. I have a medium to large white onion here. You can also use a yellow or Spanish onion. I've done it either way. And I'm gonna sort of eyeball this. Once I have it all chopped, I'll make a determination if I think I need one more onion. It just kind of depends. So I'm gonna chop these now. And okay, so the next thing is that I'm gonna cut these in slices. I don't know, that's probably half an inch thick. And I'm just gonna cut those in big slices, and then I'm gonna dice this. Okay guys, so you can see by the way I just chopped that, it's a pretty rough dice. There are other recipes that I make where I have to chop it pretty finely. For this is kind of a rustic meal, so it's kind of pretty large chunks if you see here. So I'm just gonna set this aside in my bowl, and then I'm gonna move on to preparing the carrots. Okay, next step guys is carrots. So I have a standard 1-pound bag of carrots from the grocery store. H-E-B probably sells these for less than $1. I don't even know. I mean, an inexpensive ingredient. It adds great flavor and color. So if I weren't doing this for you guys, I would just use my handy dandy vegetable scrubber brush because I hate peeling. But since I'm gonna be doing this for you guys, I am gonna go ahead and take the step to also peel these. So I'm gonna go wash these, scrub them really well with this vegetable brush, and then I'll come back and peel these and cut these up so we can get this part started. Guys, these are peeled. I am going to cut the ends off and then just do a rough chop. I kind of like big chunks of this because I like to see it in the stew. I don't want it to break down while it's cooking. So here we go. Next step, garlic. So I have just a regular bulk garlic here. I'm gonna say that we're probably gonna need about 6, maybe even 8 cloves. Now, myself, my husband, my family, we love garlic. So it may look excessive to you. We really like it in our family. I guess you could use less if you're really sensitive to it. I may end up using more than what I'm even telling you now. So, you know, this is probably the most tedious part of this whole task, is breaking down the garlic. So of course we're gonna take the cloves out of here, and then of course I'll show you how we smash them to get those open, and then peel them, and then we'll mince it. Okay guys, breaking down garlic, in case you don't know this. So when you have a clove like this, if you try to just sit here with your fingernails and peel it off, or even just try to cut the ends off, I mean, you'll be here all night. It's super sticky once you actually do it if you've never done this before. Another thing is, go to the grocery store and they actually sell minced garlic and, a pretty big jar, and that works just fine. Now, I think fresh garlic is best, but the minced garlic, I use it all the time when I'm making tacos, when I'm doing stuff like that for breakfast, something quick, that works just fine. For this, since we're doing kind of, a rustic meal, I'm gonna use the actual garlic. So here we go. You're gonna set that clove down. You're gonna get your knife and sort of the butt end of it, set it right on top, and then you're just gonna kind of smash it with your palm to sort of break it down, and then it makes it easier to peel from there. So here we go. So you can see that sort of smashed it. Now I can easily peel this off, and I'll keep going. Okay, so you may have noticed that the one thing that I did not prepare in advance are the potatoes. So the potatoes, I leave that for kind of the last hour of the stew cooking. And I don't want to prepare those in advance, because if you peel and slice potatoes and you leave them out, they'll start to brown and kind of get a little bit mushy. So we want to wait until the end for that part. But our carrots, our onions, garlic, and the stew has been chopped, so it's prepared. The next thing I'm going to do is pour a little bit of olive oil over the stew meat, and I'm going to put kosher salt and ground black pepper over it. I'm just going to toss it, and the best tools to use are clean hands. I just washed my hands, and so I'm going to get in there, kind of mix that around, and then after that we will get the pot heated up so we can start. So for now, let's get this pre-seasoned. Okay, our next step is going to be to brown our stew meat. So probably one of the differences between the way I make beef stew and the way you've had it many times is, I think most people just kind of take all these ingredients, throw it in the pot with whatever liquid base they're going to use, and then let it sit and simmer for hours and hours and hours. So I don't like gray meat. So I like meat to have a nice brown color. So I will, the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be searing this stew meat in batches, small batches, so that it gets a nice brown color. It also gets a nice texture. But the other great thing is it adds flavor to the pot. So I'm using a Le Creuset Dutch oven. It's like an enameled cast iron pot that you can cook on the stovetop. You can actually put it directly in your oven as well, but it can withstand pretty high heat. So I'm gonna add olive oil and some butter to the pan, to the pot, and I'm gonna start cooking this, or I'm gonna start browning this stew meat in small batches. If you put too much meat or dump all of this in here, the meat won't brown, it'll just steam in there, and it'll kind of get a rubbery texture. So you have to kind of do this in batches. It does take a little bit of time, but trust me, it makes such a difference in the flavor, the texture, the appearance, everything. Now, the most important thing is I'm not gonna cook the stew meat all the way through in this process, because it is still gonna sit on the stovetop all together in a liquid and cook for several hours on top of the stew. On top of the stove. So for now, we're just doing kind of a quick braise on both sides, and then it also will create a natural browning liquid, and sometimes it'll even start to sort of sear on the bottom of the pot, and that's okay. It may look like it's burning, but you're gonna see later that we're gonna add some wine to the pan, and that'll sort of deglaze it and add more flavor. Okay, so that's gonna be our next step. Okay, sorry guys, I had a phone call come in the middle of my last video, hashtag Realtor Life, right? So I have kind of turned this down just a little bit. It's still on medium-high heat. We have olive oil in there, and then I'm gonna add some butter right to the pan. This is harder to do with one hand than I thought. And that'll start melting in here. And of course, this adds flavor as we start to brown. So that's going to start melting. We're at, I have an electric cooktop, so we're at like an 8 or 9 on the temperature here, and I'm gonna grab my prepared pan of beef stew and bring it on over, and then we'll start cooking that in small batches. Okay guys, I am gonna start adding the beef to brown in little small batches. When I put the first batch in here, it's gonna start sizzling and getting pretty loud. That's why we need the apron, because of the splatter. So here we go. Okay guys, I want to show you the amount of the stew that I have in there, so you can see that there's lots of sort of airspace in between each piece. And I also want you to notice that I'm using a slotted spoon. There's a couple of reasons why. First of all, I'm using this enameled cast iron pan pot from Le Cassette, so you're not supposed to use a metal spoon because it can scratch at the finish. But also for this purpose is that as I start tossing these around to get some color on them, when I'm actually pulling them out and setting them aside so I can continue to the next batch, I want to make sure that all the drippings kind of stay in the pot, to add flavor. You can already see this is kind of getting brown in here. So this is going to go on pretty high heat. Right now I'm at, let's see, an 8 on here. So we're going to let this get pretty brown, but we're not going to cook it all the way through, like I said. So I am going to pause this here and keep going. We'll move on to the next batch. Okay, so this first batch is ready to come out. You can see the great color that's on the beef, but also in the pan here. So I am just going to scoop this out, and this is what I'm talking about, that I'm going to tap that to get as much of that, oil, liquid flavor, everything off, and keep that in the pot. And I'm just going to set this aside into a bowl, and then we will continue this process for the rest of that meat. Okay, it takes a few minutes. On this next batch, I'll kind of time it so that you have an idea of how long it took me to do that first batch. In between, you may need to add more olive oil and butter, and you can actually see the bottom of this cast iron pan starting to get some color on it, and all of that is flavor. And like I said, we're going to end up deglazing this with some red wine later, and that just gives tremendous flavor to the pot, to the stew, and everything. So I am just going to move forward with doing the rest of these batches. I'm not going to video that part, and I'll time it to just give you an idea how long it took on each batch. All right, guys. Okay, guys, so all the stew meat is browned, and I have it set aside in a bowl, and I wanted to show you the inside of the pan. So it looks like, it's been through a lot, but that's all flavor in there. That's great. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in our onions so that they can brown a little bit, and then tomato paste, and we'll throw the carrots in there just very quickly, and then some red wine to deglaze the pan, and chicken broth. So here we go. We got onions. So we're throwing the onions in there, and they are already starting to get a nice brown color, and they're turning, sort of a translucent shade. This goes pretty quickly. Okay guys, the next thing I'm going to do is put some red wine in here to deglaze the pan and add flavor, obviously. And what I typically say is just pick, it doesn't have to be fancy, just pick a red wine that you would like to drink. Usually I just use kind of an inexpensive Pinot Noir. My husband just happens to have this one open. This was given to me as a gift from my cousin. Shout out to my cousin, thank you. And we have this one open, so I'm going to use this just to deglaze. Here it goes. Look at that color. Let me show you this. And you're going to see now that once I stir this around, look at this, it's getting this deep dark color, but you can kind of see the pan now that kind of those burnt looking bits, which weren't really burnt, the pan is clear now. So this is great flavor in here. Next thing I'm gonna do is add the garlic. And the reason that I wanna put the garlic in now and not, before this is because garlic will get a bitter taste if it burns. So this liquid kind of acts as a buffer for that. I'm gonna add the garlic. I'm gonna throw in our carrots. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is tomato paste. Oh, my dog Jack is being a guard dog. Next thing I'm going to do is add in a can of tomato paste. I'm going to put this entire can in here. So tomato paste just adds a richness, obviously color to this. And I'm going to put the tomato paste in here, and then I'm going to toss everything together. It's going to get sort of thickened when I do that. And then the next step will be to add chicken broth, believe it or not. So here we go. Guys, I wanted to show you what it looks like. I've mixed the tomato paste in there, so you can see it's kind of got a thickened look. I wish you could smell this. It smells so great. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take our bowl of beef stew and throw it back in there, all the juices and all. I don't know if I can hold this and hold the camera, but let's try. Look at all that liquid goodness in there. That is such good flavor, guys. All right, and then the next thing I'm going to do is get chicken broth. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I have one of these 32-ounce packages of chicken broth that comes from the H-E-B. You find it in the soup aisle. This is a great base for so many of the things that I cook. And I know it sounds funny to use chicken broth in beef stew. I have used the beef the beef broth before, but I actually like this chicken broth a little bit better. It's not as strong as a flavor, but it definitely does add flavor and obviously volume to the stew dish. So I'm gonna pour this in. I'm gonna mix everything together. And then after this, it'll be a couple of dashes of Worcestershire. So I poured that whole container of chicken broth in there. You can see that it's helped to reduce that tomato paste down. Sorry, my dog is here doing my cooking show with me, hoping for scraps. So next thing I'm gonna do is dump some Worcestershire here, and I don't know, a couple of... Worcestershire adds a savoriness, obviously, and a little bit of color. So probably the most important lesson to, when you're learning to cook is that, of course, I'm adding flavor and things in here now. As this is finishing up cooking, I'm obviously going to taste it at different stages to see if I need to add more salt, more pepper, whatever it is. But other than that, the only other spice that I add other than salt and pepper to this is paprika. And so paprika will add a little bit of color, a little bit of flavor. I'm going to add a couple of shakes of that. Whoa, that's probably more than I normally would do, but it's hard to balancing the camera with this. And then I'm going to mix this all together, and then I'm going to bring this to a boil. So I'm going to turn up the heat. I'm going to let it get to a boil. I'll let it boil probably a minute or two, and then I'll turn it down to kind of a medium temperature. I'll cover it, and I'll let it sit for about an hour. And I'll check on it at that point. And then at that point, I'll start peeling the potatoes and chopping them into chunks to add those in. Those go in for the last part, like I mentioned to you earlier. Okay, the stew has been simmering for about an hour. I'm gonna go ahead and prepare the potatoes. Normally when I make this, I make it with the little red potatoes, and those I would just scrub really well with that vegetable brush and chop those in half and throw them in there. The other day when I was at the store, it was hectic and I couldn't find red potatoes, so I just got a bag of regular old russet potatoes. So in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and peel these and cut these into pretty big chunks, and I'll throw those in the stew after that. They'll sit in there for about another 35-40 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna take these, rinse these off really quickly, and then start chopping. There it is, it's finished. I did a taste test. I added a couple more shakes of Worcestershire, gave it a stir, and it is ready. I'm gonna call my family down for dinner and get it served up in some pretty bowls, and hope that this warms their bellies and their souls, and just to help us get through this difficult time. And remember that family time and a nourishing meal means so much more than you might think. I hope you guys take a shot at this meal for your own families and let me know what you think. Enjoy!